Party.
I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Our top stories. Labour is calling on the Gambling Commission to name candidates being investigated over the election date betting scandal. Pat McFadden, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has written to the Commission's CEO, urging for the details to be released before polling day. It comes amid reports that the Conservative Party's Chief Data Officer, Nick Mason, has taken a leave of absence. The Tories' Director of Campaigns, Tony Lee, and his wife, Laura Saunders, are also being probed, as is the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Private Secretary, Craig Williams, who's admitted to, quote, an error of judgment. The Labour leader has suggested that benefits offer less dignity to people than earning a living through work. Sir Keir Starmer took aim at handouts from the state in a piece for the Sunday Telegraph. He said serving the interests of working people means understanding that they want success more than state support. His comments come as the latest Savanta poll shows Labour retaining its lead over the Conservatives. The poll has Labour on 42% of the vote and the Tories on just 19%. Manchester Airport says flights are restarting after a quarter were cancelled today due to a power outage. Earlier, all flights from Terminals 1 and 2 were cancelled and passengers advised not to come to the airport after a major power cut caused huge queues and disruption to baggage processing. Work is now underway to reschedule those flights in the coming days, and tomorrow's flights are not thought to be affected. GB News spoke with one passenger who says they were left in the dark for hours.
Well, we arrived and there was no disruption to start with. We were all queuing up. It were queuing up outside the car park, and we went in and they said, "You're just in a holding pen basically until we can get these further flights in first moved." But then no changed, and we were there for about 5 or 6 hours, just stood in terminal building, and we never moved.
What time did you arrive this morning?
2:45 in the morning, and we were there. I don't think they told us until what we were doing until about 10 or something like that, wasn't it? About 9:30 or something like that, when they cancelled flights.
Search teams attempting to locate British teenager Jay Slater have narrowed their efforts to small buildings close to where his phone last pinged in Tenerife. Jay Slater went missing a week ago after he attended a music festival on the Spanish island. It was his first holiday without his parents. His mum issued a direct plea yesterday saying, "We just need you home." Those conducting the searches could be seen today looking into blue barrels outside one of those small buildings. Just before he went missing on Monday, the 19-year-old called a friend saying he was lost and needed water. Scotland are getting ready to take on Hungary in their final Group A game of the Euros football tournament this evening. Thousands of Scottish fans have been getting into the mood in Germany, singing their way into tonight's game, and not even rain can dampen the Tartan army's spirits. And for good reason too, as Scotland's clash with Hungary could see their team reach the knockout stage of a major tournament for the very first time. Critics didn't give the injury-hit Scots much of a hope after their 4-1 opening loss to host Germany in Munich, but a 1-1 draw with the Swiss has placed them within reach of qualification. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's time for Neil Oliver.
The footage of US President Joe Biden on the world stage is a metaphor for our times. His faltering and failing on the presidential campaign trail, his incomprehensible mumblings, his advanced decrepitude, even his fragility. Just as that old man is done, visibly confused, spent, and needing time not in the glare of the spotlight, but more likely in a care home or perhaps in jail, so is the collective establishment of the West. As the one dieth, you might say, so dieth the other. The most powerful man in the world, nominally at least, appears senile, and inside the machine that he represents, the marbles are running lost. President Biden is the wizened cherry atop a stale, worm-eaten cake. The metaphor of senility and decay might usefully be extended. All around President Joe Biden, Sippy Cup Joe, is gathered an increasingly rigid support structure, a scaffold to stop the decaying ruin from finally, inevitably falling over. For all their effort, denial and obfuscation, it's anyone's guess how long they can keep him upright. It's also anyone's guess how long the corrupted West can remain standing in its present form, if at all. When a civilization persists not by maintaining and spreading peace, but by spreading war, including stoking the fires of global thermonuclear war, then that civilization is civilized no more. Those supporters of Biden are likely much more desperate than the old man himself. They would have to be, because at the moment, though some would say not for much longer, he is their golden ticket, a tarnished golden ticket to the Willy Wonka chocolate factory. While the old man drifts along, unmoored from the minutiae of day-to-day reality, those around him know all too well that, for the time being at least, if they don't keep him in place, watch and guide him moment by moment, then they lose their power, and they can't have that. In many ways, the bigger problem we face in the West is the way too many trusting souls seek only to perpetuate a system, indeed keep faith with a system that's no longer fit for purpose. President Joe Biden is done, and the collective response to his incompetence is only to find another to take his place. If the Biden swamp has its way, another factotum will be manoeuvred into place, another rictus grin to distract the masses while corrupted entities wring the last drops from the system. It's a similar situation on this side of the Atlantic. Our leaders and would-be leaders are not suffering senile dementia, but they are also factotums filling roles at the pleasure of others within a system that is visibly misfiring and winding down like an old clock, stuttering towards a final failure that, if not arrested in time, may yet be catastrophic for billions. As a consequence of so much that's wrong, so much that has gone wrong, more and more of our money, rights, freedom, even safety and security must be taken from the many so that a rotten few might maintain themselves in the style to which they are accustomed. Thousands of young men and women are already cold in the clay of Ukraine, sacrificed for profit, and the net for catching more sacrificial lambs spreads wider all the time. In the US, a bill is passing through Congress that will see every young man between the ages of 18 and 26 automatically registered for draft, and so ready for call-up for whatever wars America wants to fight, against Russia in Ukraine, perhaps against China over Taiwan. Running alongside that freshly minted US legislation, which has already passed through the House of Representatives, are moves to register all women of the same age range as well. A person might wonder what the authorities have in mind if they need everyone between the ages of 18 and 26 registered ready for drafting into the military. For anyone still labouring under the misapprehension that the state cares about you, wants you well, then perhaps the realisation that those psychopaths appear to be preparing to sacrifice more youngsters on the altar of the god of war might open more eyes to the fact those regarded as leaders, those supposed to care, mean to do quite the opposite. More and more, I wonder why so many people continue to think and act as if they need looking after anyway, looking after by some idealised grown-up with all the answers. Even after all these years, all these millennia, in fact, the search is still on for the good king, the ultimate father figure to keep the monsters at bay. Implicit in that behaviour is the childish wish for rescue by a hero, by a knight in shining armour. If we don't waken up and accept that no one is coming to save us, more importantly, that we don't need someone to come and save us, then we will be trapped in the fairy tale forever. The merest investigation of most of those that are attracted by the idea of the top job, the job of telling everyone else what to do, reveals characters who turn their backs on their own failings as individuals and persuade themselves instead that it's their destiny to dictate how everyone else should live their lives instead. As the generations have come and gone, we have somehow been persuaded to surrender more and more control over our lives, over the lives of our families and communities, to distant individuals who neither know us nor care about us. Personally, I think this is madness. All the headlines and manufactured panic now are about the so-called right, which is to say popular parties talking about the need for secure borders and the preservation of national identities, the preservation of cultures and the defence of a religion that served us well for most of 2,000 years. The fear porn about fascists and the like is from those dependent on the status quo who fear any challenge to their anti-human agenda. Anyone speaking up for the people will therefore be demonised by the establishment as the right and the far right, but that's just to distract attention from the actual direction from which the real danger has come. The West now is being nudged ever closer to international communism, world communism, one world government by those that presume to address and conquer the endless complexities of life with simplistic one-size-fits-all policies. I say Marxism isn't even a political ideology. If Karl Marx was anything other than a freeloading parasite and envious malcontent, he was a theologian, and Marxism is a religion demanding faith and sacrifice, ideally the sacrifice of other people's money, and then finally of the people themselves. The World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, those and others of the same ilk are only the latest products of a communist mindset. Previous applications of communism in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas have led always and only to piles of corpses numbering in the millions. World communism, one world government by communists, will surely lead to a pile of corpses greater than all of those that were raised during the 20th century and by an order of magnitude. I would say communism will fail again, and the evidence of history is that communism always fails, because by its very nature it fails individual human beings every time. Just this week, a story in the Dutch news carried the headline, "The Netherlands will have to get rid of the idea that electricity is available to everyone at all times." A first world country where politicians profess to live or die by progressive principles, walking back into the darkness of the days before the Industrial Revolution. Like rust, communism never sleeps and is always at work eroding the well-being of people and peoples. When confronted by this inevitability from the WEF and their "you'll own nothing and be happy" insanity, and from a Labour Party here in Britain led by a man who says he's more at home in Davos than in Westminster, the reality is stark. So that the latest fiddling around the edges by those still believing the creaking past their sell-by date institutions here may yet provide the answer to the bigger problem are tragically doing no more than bringing a knife to a gunfight. I don't want a revolution, by the way. Revolutions are optical illusions, circuses for the hapless gullible, exploited by part of the elite to knock the incumbent group of the elite off their perches to make room. The angry mob is only the tool of the elite, briefly used and then cast aside. The English Revolution was not by the people. The French Revolution was not by the people. The Russian Revolution was not by the people. The list of revolutions that weren't by the people goes on and on. I think what we need is closer to a renaissance or a renewal. I say some of what is actually needed is the reduction of the scale and reach of government. Government in its place and back in its box. And while we're at it, we should remember its more accurate description is not government anyway, but administration. People elected to administrations don't govern. They're supposed to do no more than represent and then administer the power of a population of sovereign individuals. As far as possible, people should be left alone to govern themselves, which they're eminently capable of doing if big government would simply get out of the way. And before anyone trumpets local government, as long as the party system prevails, local government is a busted flush too. The disguised bankruptcies of one after another being cases in point. One of the challenges we face is the inbred culture of dependency, by which I mean too many have been raised to look for help from strangers. Centralised taxation of every sort is utterly out of control. We have the greatest tax burden since the Second World War, and for what? Crumbling infrastructure at home while billions of our pounds are shipped abroad to be laundered through corrupt wars that produce nothing but the corpses of the innocent. Why is it greedy to want to make decisions about the use of money you've earned by your own efforts, but somehow not greedy to want to help yourself to money earned by someone else? Here's the thing. In the world of geopolitics, you might say there are no good guys anymore. Just a miserable choice of dodgy characters, all pursuing their own self-interested ends, and to hell with the likes of you and me. But the mask has slipped. In recent years, and especially in the past few months, those that would lead the West have exposed themselves for what they really are, and it ain't pretty. As people waken up to the ugly truth, so too one nation after another is turning away from an old and bloodthirsty system, forging new alliances. After half a century of US dollar dominance, and in no small part due to the way that currency has been weaponised, more and more players on the world stage are trading in other currencies. No matter what they do now, the baddies are bleeding from self-inflicted wounds. What matters most is to take whatever steps are necessary at the ballot box and elsewhere to stop them taking the rest of us down with them. Now, let's have a chat with my aforementioned guest this evening, Alex Storey, Olympian and former Conservative Party candidate. Good evening, Alex.
How are you?
I am well. I know I covered a lot of topics there, but I do wonder, is America, the United States of America, that so you and I grew up being told we're the good guys, are they becoming, well, at the very least, some kind of international laughingstock?
Well, I think that's the right conclusion to take. The point I would make is that if you choose a leader like Joe Biden, you cannot expect people to take you that seriously. He is a representation, as you said, of a decaying West, or at least a moral decrepitude. There is nothing about the character that's good. If you go back into his past, you mentioned jail for him, and I suspect a lot of people in the US, if they knew the truth about him, or if they dug a little bit deeper, they would agree with you that that's probably where he should end up if he doesn't die beforehand. But what I've come to think about since over the last few years is thinking about America as one of the bad actors in the world, whereas I'd never thought that when I was a child in the 80s. America was on the good side of the argument, and probably you and I would have watched Rambo, 1 and 2, and perhaps not 3 because it wasn't such a great film, but although I did watch it, but then the week later the wall came down, so it was no longer quite so relevant. But the Noam Chomsky view of the world was something that I rejected absolutely, because I couldn't contemplate the West being that bad. And actually, over the course of time, over the last few years, I've started to think, hang on, we have been the bad actors, the West, led by America, not by the American people. I'm not I'm not accusing the American people of doing bad things. I'm accusing the administration, if not the elected representatives of America, of being the bad actors. But it's been amazing to see this shift.
I listen. I'm not proposing or suggesting for 1 minute that that there are any good guys. I'm not on anyone's side when it comes to geopolitics. I just observe, and I wonder at this perpetuation, which seems utterly naive to me now, of our side as the goodies.
Yeah.
Since 1980, I made a note. The US has bombed or invaded, well, Iran, Lebanon, Grenada, Libya, Panama, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, Yemen, Somalia, and Niger.
Yeah,
I think I mentioned Somalia twice. However, and yet, at the same time, is held up as just an unquestionable force.
No, but that's the point. I think the only thing that you can be in geopolitical affairs is be an observer, because there's not much that you and I can shift or change. And I think the really interesting thing about having good and interesting discussions with good people is that you can make objective observations. It's one of the reasons why I'm quite ambivalent on the war in Ukraine, because I was very aware in '99 that we were doing something that was fundamentally wrong. The bombing of Serbia, remember, really shook me to my core, because I thought, my God, we're bombing a European city.
Going to have to pause for a break, after which I'll be joined by Holocaust survivor Vera Sharaf to talk about her latest documentary. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The new BBC Director of Sport, who's a man called Alex K. Jelski, who's downplayed fears raised by sports women about biological men competing in female categories. And he's also called Martina Navratilova, I've got to say, has to be probably the most successful woman tennis player in history, and a very brave woman too. She escaped the Iron Curtain and she came out. And Sharon Davis, he says, are not experts on the issue.
At the same time, transgender US swimmer Leah Thomas has lost her legal battle and been told that she cannot compete at the Olympics.
So Leah Thomas made an appeal to World Aquatics, who have this rule in place that says that they protect the female category, as does athletics and world cycling. And because Leah doesn't actually qualify, because Leah isn't training, so she's not even someone that would be potentially part of the Olympic team. They just said that, you know, you don't qualify to be able to bring this case. It's been thrown out on a technicality, thank goodness, and which means that, you know, swimming will not have any males beating elite females in Paris this summer, which was particularly good for me, bearing in mind that I now have to be very careful about what I'm allowed to say and not say. We're not allowed to use the words biological male, transitioned male. I mean, just every single possible way that we could explain that the person in the race wasn't a female, and it only affects women. It doesn't affect men. You know, females that identify as male are no risk to men's sport in any shape or form. It's just women that are losing their opportunities. The thing I take the most offence to, and this is very serious, and this needs to be dealt with by the BBC, and this is why I wrote to Tim Davie. In that article, he compared males that are identifying as women in women's sport to Jamaican and Ethiopian females being allowed to compete.
What?
The People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. My first guest this week is Vera Sharav, a Holocaust survivor and human rights activist. She has a new documentary coming out asking if we are heading towards global tyranny. Vera joins me now. Thank you for joining us, Vera.
Thank you for having me.
A documentary called From Tyranny to Awakening. Can I ask, it's a big question, but what concerns you most when you look out at the world at the moment?
From Tyranny to Awakening this explores really the suppressed, essential spiritual part of humanity. This has been totally suppressed, put under as though it doesn't matter. Only technological things matter. Only what you can measure, right? I mean, everyone has been geared in the West to do just that and to only value whatever is quantifiable. But human beings have much more to them than, you know, having the ability to do math and physics. And the spiritual part is what is so unique. And so decided to explore a bit about that part from people who are, you know, seers, people who have, you know, it's interesting. There are people who have talents that other people don't. But of course, everyone has something unique. And this is the other part. We are being treated as pretty much as a herd. And people have stopped using their God-given freedom of choice. What I think one needs to return to a bit, take time to listen to your inner intuition. In my case, it saved my life. In my case, truly, by disobeying authority, I saved my life, and I was 6.5.
I sometimes, Vera, if I could just jump in there, I do wonder, I listen to you, and I know, you know, we've spoken in the past, you know, that you survived the camp. I wonder have the lessons of the 20th century, or the lessons that we were supposed to learn from the 20th century, have they by now been completely forgotten?
Totally. Because history has been relegated to irrelevance, including the Holocaust. It's just being used politically. But no, the lessons have not been learned at all. And people still believe that some people are, to be dismissed. That's called the Untermenschen. That's the way the Nazis called it, right? But that's how the West regards lots of different indigenous people.
And so, Vera, what have you sought to address? What have you sought to address in your latest documentary? Such a huge topic. How have you been able to, crystallise it down into a narrative?
First of all, people, if you just give yourself a chance to relax, to really smell the roses and all that sort of thing, because we haven't been. You look at people, no one is talking to each other. They're all with their cell phone. You go into an elevator, you go into a train, and it's all over. And really, it was supposed to be that you connect with people, but in fact, it has disconnected you from the people around you. You don't notice them at all. In order to reach into, spirituality, you have to take time. You have to give it a chance. It's not, this is not something that hits you over the head. And, spiritualists feel also that everybody, they're born into a specific time and that there's a specific purpose. And I really began to feel that in these last few years, that finally I realized that, yes, there was a reason why I survived. And that is to speak out and to call tyranny, a spade a spade.
Bear with me while I just bring in my guest in the studio with me, Alex Story. Alex, Vera talking about the way in which it really chimes with me that our obsession with screen time, everyone looking into their mobile phones everywhere you go, and that we were supposed by that technology to be more connected. And Vera saying, actually, it's done completely the reverse. We're disconnected from the people around us.
Yeah,
that is, there is something. There's a profound challenge there, isn't there?
Yeah, and so I'm blessed with 4 lovely children, and I realized one day, because I travel a lot more than I should, and I remember coming home every day and hearing the tipper-tap of my children running down the corridor and hugging their gigantic dad, and me really enjoying that little moment of real love, of unconditional love, which is so rare. And then one day, the same thing happened. I opened the door, there was complete silence. So I walked down the corridor, silence, and then I turned into the living room, and my 4 children were on devices, barely looking up, and as they did, they just went, and then they kept playing. So my Neanderthal reaction was to grab all the devices and put them in the bin. And I think, in a way, what we have to realize is that there's a real price to technology that stops of delegation, and I think that's what we have at the moment.
Vera, reassure me, if you will. Reassure me, if you can, that there are reasons for optimism, based on the experiences that you have talking to those with whom you have directly communicated.
Well, yes, I think that people really can rejuvenate. We have to take back our freedom and our brains to tell us what to do. We don't need experts to tell us how to live our lives. We don't need to obey authority when authority has been misleading us totally. And the spirituality actually is what gives us the power to get off the high-tech expressway, which is intentionally leading to a transhumanist hell. That's what leads to hell, not, and once you realize that, you just have to, disengage from some of these gadgets that have really taken over our lives.
Thank you so much. All the best of luck with the documentary. We will talk again. Thank you, Vera Sharaf. Another break is upon us, after which Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired US Colonel and former White House advisor, to contemplate, amongst other things, the North-South International Transport Corridor, which may become a way for countries in the East to trade without being dependent on the West. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there's a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells, in some spots 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but it's actually about you.
And we won't ever forget that. Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
Now more than ever, it's important to hear
all sides as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. I'm joined now by retired US Colonel and former White House advisor Douglas Macgregor to contemplate the North-South Corridor, an alternative trade route that bypasses the Suez Canal. Russia, Azerbaijan and Iran are developing the route to find alternative ways to go about the business of trade without being dependent on the West. Is this further proof of the United States of America's world dominance dwindling? Always good to see you, Colonel Macgregor. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
How much does the development of this North-South transport corridor tell us about what feels like a realignment of the pieces in the geopolitical jigsaw puzzle?
Oh, absolutely. I think the tectonic plates in the international system are moving and ultimately crushing America's political, financial, economic, and military hegemony. All of this, to be blunt, is inevitable in any case. Over time, these things happen, new power centers emerge, but it's happening very quickly now, largely thanks to our own, in my judgment, stupidity. But what you're pointing to in Iran is extremely important because it reaches beyond the countries that you just mentioned, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia. Right now, the Saudis are actually talking to the Iranians about participating in this and investing in it, the Chinese and the Indians as well. It's very interesting because, you know, India right now is led by a Hindu nationalist, but the Saudis and the Gulf Emirates are looking at this particular route and looking past that hostility to Islam in favor of what they see as a potentially lucrative and secure alternative to what we see today, which is you move largely by ship over the waterways and up through the Suez Canal. So I think we're just seeing another attempt, as we are in the financial system with BRICS and others, to circumvent this oppressive financial system that we set up and then weaponized against the rest of the world.
It's very interesting, Colonel, when you describe it that way, that there's a pragmatism manifesting there where, you know, Hindu nationalism and Islam, put that to one side and get on with business. And it's the West and America, at least, that are hanging on to things ideological as though that's the better path.
Well, all people tend to cling to the obsolete. It's our nature. We don't want to give up what we know. Washington is similar to Versailles under Louis XIV. Everyone sees themselves at the center of the universe. Well, that's obviously not the case. We forget that the reason we were the preeminent power had a great deal to do with the fact that at the end of the Second World War, everyone else was in ruins. We escaped all of the damage. And of course, we did everything in our power to destroy the British Empire, which is something I still don't think people in Britain understand. Having destroyed the British Empire, there was no to us other than the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, for reasons that we now know, was really declining almost from the end of the Second World War until it finally collapsed. But we refused to give up this illusion that we've had for the last 30 years that there's nobody else but us. And instead of welcoming other nations to the international system and finding ways to do business with them, we've done the opposite. Look at what we've just done to the Russians. We're trying to steal money from them, which is incomprehensible. I mean, this is our financial system. What does that tell the rest of the world? It tells the rest of the world you don't want to use the American financial system, because if you do, they'll steal your money. I mean, this is the height of stupidity in Washington. So this route makes a lot of sense to a lot of people.
Bear with me, Colonel. Alex Story. It's quite a notion, isn't it? It's quite an idea to comprehend that America is the last person in the room to realise that the world has changed or is changing in such a fundamental way.
Well, I think we mentioned it before, but in your speech, it's the evidence of decline is evidenced by the person leading it, and you cannot look at America with Biden in power and think, oh, this country is going in the right direction. And of course, all the old habits that that person embodies, all the baggage is there. But what's for me one of the shocking things that happened when the invasion of Russia started was that we kicked off Russia off the SWIFT system, and that we attacked Russian citizens, well, Russian people in Britain who were British citizens with Russian ancestry. So in other words, all the principles of law were thrown out the window, and we went for expediency. When we went, we can do this because we're powerful. And that kind of attitude obviously means that the other powers are shifting away from this oppressive system.
Colonel McGregor, it feels to me, and I said earlier in the show, it feels as though, against all of my expectations growing up, that America is becoming something of a laughingstock. It's behaving in such a way that it's looking ridiculous in the face of a changing world.
Well, there's a reason that many of us refer to the clown show in Washington, D.C. And I would argue that over the last few decades, it's been a question of new cars filled with clowns pulling up in front of the Capitol building and the White House, emptying that set of clowns out and waiting another 2 or 4 years to bring in a new set of clowns. Yeah, I've got to be frank with you. There are very few people that I run into in Washington, D.C. that are really grounded in reality. And if you are not grounded in reality, if you've decided you are the center of the world, that you are right, that everyone else is wrong, then it's very difficult to reconcile yourself to a new world. It's just incomprehensible. I was reading the other day about Dean Acheson after World War II. We were very full of ourselves and said no important matter can be decided anywhere in the world today without American military, political, economic, diplomatic participation. That was 1946. Then in 1992, 93, we had Madeleine Albright, whose name was not indicative of her abilities. And she sat there and told everyone, well, we're the indispensable nation. Nothing can be decided without us. I mean, it's this sort of unbridled hubris and arrogance that is now finding its way into the dust, I think. I think we're going to be humiliated because the rest of the world doesn't have to play in our particular sandbox. And that's the lesson of this route. And your guest mentioned the SWIFT system. That's another problem. It takes time to build alternatives. But if we've done anything, I think we have forced cohesion on the world against us. I mean, China and Russia cooperate for a whole range of reasons. And everybody in the United States thinks this is awful. When in reality, if you look at history, it's a very good thing. Each side has something to sell the other. That's good. That's not bad. We've seen plenty of evidence for friction between China and Russia. Instead of saying, this is actually a good thing, looking at our own position, one of the things that we've never understood is that you can build fast sea lift, you can build super fast trains, and you can move goods from Europe to Asia faster through the United States than you can by sea, anywhere else in the world. We've never tried to do that. We just take it for granted. We're the center of the world. Well, we're not. We're going to end up much like the Mediterranean ended up, I think, once Columbus discovered a new world. Suddenly all the trade switched from the Atlantic coast of Europe straight across to North America and South America. I think we're going to have a similar experience as Americans with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, quite frankly, doesn't need us.
You're going to be joining us for the second hour of this show this evening, but so far this evening, Colonel McGregor, thank you very much. After the break, I'll be joined by speech and language therapist Sandy Chappell, whose book, How to Raise a Chatterbox, helps parents parent without screens. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
So, question is, what can we do to get young people to eat healthy food? Here's dietitian and nutrition consultant Helen Bond. Helen, what do you think?
Eating habits formed at this age tend to persist into later life. We know we're eating too much fat, sugar, salt, and not enough of the good things like fibre, fruits and vegetables, all of those things. So yes, we need to help this age group so they have the skill set and they have the nutrition knowledge to take that forward.
Do you agree that it is impossible to eat healthily on a budget and quickly as well, or do you have any sort of fail-safe, affordable and very quick to prep meals that you'd recommend youngsters try?
It doesn't have to be expensive either, but you have to have those kind of cost-cutting hacks and those time-saving things in the kitchen. Make use, I always say, of things like peas, beans and lentils, which are a type of pulse, very inexpensive compared to meat, and yet they double up as one of your 5 a day, and also a great source of plant-based protein. If you overget a milk as something, you have too much milk, maybe make some lattes.
I just wanted to throw a shoe at the TV, really, because was there nothing else on or nothing else available? The point being there is an audience, there is obviously an appeal, there's obviously people are watching this stuff. So what are they doing? Are they watching and not cooking?
I think that's it. They're watching and maybe enjoying all the cookery programs like I do. And I'm a typical person in the kitchen. I must have about 100 cookbooks. But sometimes when you are time poor, you know, you've got to feed a family or you've got to feed yourself and everything, you don't really know where to start. And I think that's why apps and having things online for this younger audience makes it much more accessible. Start with one recipe and build it up from there. Like I said,
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
My next guest this evening is author Sandy Chappell. Sandy has written a book entitled How to Raise a Chatterbox, encouraging parents to keep their children away from screens as much as possible. Sandy joins me now, I hope. Hello, Sandy, how are you?
Hi, Neil. I'm good, thanks. Thank you very much for having me.
Such a fascinating topic. You know, I'm a dad. My kids are grown now, but I well remember the early stages of communication. How best does a baby, an infant, learn to speak?
The best way is by social interaction, by listening to their parents and their family and people around them, and by them adults and other people responding to what the baby and the infant's trying to communicate. They certainly don't learn by staring at a screen. And the shocking thing is that studies show babies are being exposed to screens from as early as 6 months old.
I must also wonder with you the extent to which the COVID era took its toll. I'm thinking about face masks on adults, which presumably meant, and restricted access to extended family, the extent to which that inhibited that natural copycat action of babies following what their parents' mouths were doing.
Absolutely. And the impact of masks was really downplayed. But clearly babies look at adults' faces all the time. And also when I'm working with children with speech problems, I sit opposite them so they can see my face. And I'm constantly asking them to look at their mouth so that they can see the shapes of the sounds, because that's partly how they learn to make those sounds. So yeah, that did have an impact. However, I would say lockdowns had the biggest impact of all. They had a devastating impact on children's speech and language development. And we went from, before lockdowns, we went from 1.5 million children who were struggling. We now have 1.9 million. That's 1 in 5 children who were struggling in some way with their talking or understanding. And the numbers aren't going down. And I think that's partly because a typical day of young children at home changed beyond all recognition, and it hasn't gone back again to the way it used to be. So there's an increasing reliance on screens, different devices.
Bear with me, Sandy. Alex, you were talking about it earlier. It's something that plays on my mind all of the time. So profound, isn't it, that in the last few years we actually managed as a society to inhibit the ability of our youngest generation to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that you see when you see children on devices. They're hypnotized, there's no communication, and they become a stranger to you. And there's nothing quite as depressing as having children in your house who completely ignore that you're there and have a closer relationship with a part of the world that they don't know. And they've turned their parents and siblings into foreigners in their own homes, and that's the observation. But if I can add a couple of things on COVID and the masks, for me that was the most heartbreaking thing. Was one, seeing children with masks on, not being able to see them smile, in particular when they're quite young. They've got this cherubic face, and you just want to hug them because they look so sweet. It changes when they get a bit older, obviously, but and the second one was the inability of children to go and play outside. Of course, when we were younger, when you were punished, you had to stay indoors and you were kicked out of the house, and being out was to be free and to have fun. Now it's exactly the opposite. If you shove your children outside, you're punishing them, and if you keep them indoors in front of their devices, you're rewarding them.
Sandy, I have to ask, what hope is there for the adults to break infants and babies and youngsters away from screens when every adult, almost without exception, is similarly addicted to the drug, in inverted commas?
Absolutely. We definitely have to lead by example and spend as little time as we can on our own screens when we're with our children. One of the shocking things for me is that 25% of 3-year-olds have their own smartphone. And I just can't get my head around that, because they will not benefit from that at all. In fact, it's harmful. The recent Education Select Committee concluded that the harms absolutely outweigh the benefits. So we need to get young children off screens, and they don't even want them, Neil. I did a bit of an experiment at work last year where I took an iPad in for a term, and I let children choose an activity out of a toy bag, and not one child chose the iPad. They all chose to play a game, like Pop-Up Pirate, Hungry Hippos. They wanted to do a jigsaw puzzle. Not one of them wanted to play on the iPad, so I stopped taking it.
That is interesting. But I mean, I believe the technology that we're inviting babies to look at is the most addictive technology that the world has ever known. It's interesting that obviously for a certain period of their time, naturally they're less inclined. The hooks don't go in right at the beginning. It's almost as though it's because adults, for want of a quiet life, are handing and giving kids no option but to look at the screen because it's easier for the adult.
There is that, and there's also parents want to do what's best for their children, and these apps on the App Store, there's 500,000 apps that claim to be educational, when in fact most of them aren't. App developers can use whatever language they want, so we really need some quality standards there so that that doesn't happen. And parents simply shouldn't be giving children devices, because very quickly they do get addicted and they start asking for them, and then behaviour problems kick in when they can't have what they want.
That's it for the Neil Oliver Show on TV this week. There's plenty more online, though, at gbnews.com, where I'll be discussing peace talks in Ukraine, the petrodollar, and why we have lost the ability to build, well, pretty much anything. Thanks to all my guests, especially to Alex Story. He'll be staying with me for the second hour. Free Speech Nation is up next on the telly. I'll see you next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there's a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells, in some spots 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight in a Take at 10 special. With Wimbledon around the corner, there's one noticeable absentee. The treatment of Sue Barker by the BBC is a national disgrace. Plus why the departure of millionaires from this country is a hollow victory which will make all of us poorer. My top pundits, tomorrow's papers, and politics legend Edwina Currie. We're live at 9.